In politics, they always say timing is everything. So when Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte announced she's running for president in 2028, a full 4 years ahead of schedule, it pretty much blew up the entire playbook. This wasn't some leak or a rumor. Nope. This was a very deliberate, very public declaration. So what's the strategy behind a move this early? Let's get into it and unpack the reasons she laid out in a recent, really detailed interview. And she frames her whole campaign around this one powerful quote. "It took me 47 years to understand my life was never meant to be mine." You see, this isn't just a political line. She's setting up her run as a personal destiny, a kind of calling she's been grappling with for most of her life. Okay, to really understand what's going on here, we're going to break this down into 5 key pieces. We'll look at the super dramatic way she made the declaration. We'll dive into her story of being a reluctant leader. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of her break with President Marcos, see how she's already hitting back at her critics, and finally, we'll unpack what she calls the Duval model, which is basically her big piece of evidence that she's ready for the top job. So, first up, the declaration. And the real story here isn't just what she said, but how she said it. The whole setup was just loaded with symbolism. You'd think for a huge announcement like this, you'd have all the official stuff, the vice president's seal, the Philippine flag, the works. But she got rid of all of it, and her reason was very pointed. She said this decision to run was deeply personal, and it had absolutely nothing to do with her current job as VP. And that all-black outfit, well, she specifically called it a protesta, a protest. It was a clear visual shot at the Marcos administration and, as she put it, a symbol of mourning for a country she thinks is heading down a very dark road. And that public protest? It ties right back into her personal story. She paints her whole political career not as some burning ambition, but as this reluctant calling, a path she's actually tried to avoid for a long, long time. I mean, she points out how her life has just consistently gone off script. When she was young, she dreamed of being a doctor, but then reality hits and she becomes a lawyer. Her main political goal was just to serve 3 full terms as the mayor of Davao City. Instead, she ends up as the vice president of the entire country. So what was the turning point for her? She says it came from total strangers. A security guard at a 7-Eleven, people in really remote areas, they would just come up to her and say, "Lumaban ka," which means fight. And she started to see this not as just a political slogan, but as a real sign of people's desperation, a call for her to act for them, not for herself. And to tie this all together, she grounds this whole unexpected journey in her faith, citing this verse from Proverbs. For her, this kind of explains it all. Her own plans keep getting thrown out the window by what she believes is God's purpose for her. Now, this sense of the separate destiny, well, that leads us straight into the political earthquake at the heart of all this, the total and complete collapse of the UNITEAM, that alliance that was supposed to be this unstoppable force that brought both her and President Bongbong Marcos into power, and she did not hold back on why it all fell apart. So what on earth went wrong? I mean, this was the UNITEAM, right? According to Duterte, the cracks started showing up almost as soon as they took office. She laid out a pretty clear list of what went wrong. First off, she said that the regular cabinet meetings, the ones that are essential for everyone to be on the same page, they just stopped only a few months in. Then, as the Secretary of Education, she felt her urgent warnings about a classroom shortage were just completely ignored by the president, who she says then let Congress go and chop up her department's budget. But it wasn't just about big policy stuff. She also shared this really telling personal story from the campaign trail that she now looks back on as a huge red flag. She described a street vendor handing then-candidate Marcos a letter, just asking for a little bit of help. And Marcos apparently took the letter, didn't even read it, and just passed it off to her. For Duterte, that tiny moment signaled a huge disconnect from the real struggles of everyday people. All right, so naturally, an announcement this early was going to draw a lot of fire. Let's look at how she's already getting ahead of the 2 biggest criticisms. Why so early, and what are her real motivations? So to the big question, why now? Her answer is basically pure political strategy. She says, look, politicians usually wait to declare so they don't become a target, but as she puts it, the administration has been attacking her for years anyway, so if she's already in the crosshairs, what's the point in waiting? She also put out this really carefully worded apology. And we got to be clear on this. She is not saying she's the only reason he won. She actually calls the presidency destiny. What she is saying is that she's sorry for her personal role in his win, for publicly endorsing him and for asking all of her supporters to vote for him.
Okay, so all of this, the declaration, the breakup, the defense, it all leads to her main pitch. Instead of just making a bunch of vague promises about the future, she's pointing to her actual track record as the mayor of Davos City and basically saying, hey, just look at what I've already done.
And this right here, this is the resume she's running on. Worried about peace and order? Well, she points to making Davos insurgency-free. Worried about the economy? She highlights paying off all the city's debt and helping it become one of the richest and most competitive cities in the entire country. For her, this is the proof it can be done. But she's also making it clear she's thinking way, way beyond one term. She argues that fixing the Philippines' deep-seated problems isn't a 6-year job. She puts the real number at 30 years. That kind of time frame requires consistent long-term planning, where each president actually builds on the work of the person before them, instead of just tearing it all down and starting from scratch. So with her bid now officially out there, her entire campaign really boils down to this. She's a reluctant leader, called by destiny, who is breaking away from a failed partnership to offer a proven model of local success. And that, of course, leaves us with the big question that voters will have to figure out. Can you really run a country of 115 million people the same way you run a city?